Rusame reader, Rusame, and today I bring to you the binge compilation for The Masquerade. Anyway, I'd like to invite you to join the Discord, the Reddit, and anything else linked in the description. Feel free to check out the book, that's also linked there. The Masquerade is by Daughter of Apollo, 2019. Now, on to the binge compilation. Chapter 1. The Announcement. "A ball?" I asked, agape. "Yes, America, we're hosting a ball," my father, King Britain, replied, sitting perfectly straight in his chair at the head of the table. My brothers, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, watched the situation in silence. They knew better than to get between me and the king when we were in an argument. This morning, my father had called me and my brothers into the dining room for what was supposed to be an important announcement. Clearly, this announcement was not as important as I had originally thought. But I was going to complain, but my father cut me off. "No buts. We are hosting this ball. It's been 2 years since we last had a ball," he replied. "And for good reason," I argued, but Britain's face sterned. "Prince America, it will be fine. Nothing will happen." My father's expression had turned hard, and everyone knew there was no arguing with him on the matter. I gave a frustrated huff and sat in my chair, arms crossed. "So long as you don't do anything unreasonable, everything will be fine," Britain said, clearly pleased I had stopped arguing with him. I didn't bother to dignify him with a response, and he continued. "You haven't even heard the best part yet." I rolled my eyes. Nothing King Britain could say would make me more excited about the situation. "It's going to be a masquerade." My father's eyes twinkled like we hadn't been arguing less than 5 minutes ago. That piqued my interest a little, although I wasn't about to let my father know that. "You boys are lucky. When I was your age, I desperately wanted to attend a masquerade, but the opportunity never arose," King Britain continued. "So now I'm giving you the chance that I always dreamed of." I snorted. "Thanks for having us live out your childhood fantasy, Dad." My father glared at me, but before he could say anything, his assistant, London, came in to drag him off for some royal work or something. "Boys, you may leave. I've got work to attend to." Britain waved us off, and the four of us quickly left the room, closing the door behind us. "Wow, Father was really intent on us having this ball," Australia said, looking back at the now closed door we'd just come through. "Yeah, it was a little out of nowhere," New Zealand agreed. Australia and New Zealand were twins, and they were also the youngest of the four of us. Canada, who I guess you could call the middle child, didn't say anything. He was too busy being excited for the ball. 2 years ago, at the last ball that we held, Canada had met a pretty lady and had fallen for her, and he was clearly fantasizing about seeing her again. I was the only one who wasn't excited, and it clearly showed. "May, why didn't you want to have the ball?" Australia asked. I scratched the back of my head sheepishly, trying to come up with a reasonable answer. "I just didn't want to have to meet a whole bunch of people, that's all." Australia looked unimpressed. "You're a terrible liar." "Oh, Ozzy, I think I figured it out," New Zealand cut in. "It's because May doesn't want Father to keep trying to get him with ladies." I sighed and jokingly put my hands up. All right. You figured out my secret, Kiwi. I don't want anyone messing around with my love life, trying to set me up. I sighed again. But it looks like that's gonna have to happen. Again. Technically, it was the truth. Every princess Britain had tried to set me up with hadn't stuck. It wasn't that they weren't nice or pretty. It's just that I didn't really care for them. But it wasn't the whole truth either, as there was so much more to the story than I was willing to say. So I just kept quiet. Before long, Australia had to leave, saying that he had to go take care of his huntsman spider, Melbourne, and we let him go. We were all too terrified of Australia's spider to keep him for long. Once Australia asked Canada to feed Melbourne while he was out, and when Canada tried to, Melbourne jumped on him and scared the living crap out of him. Canada doesn't like Australia's pets anymore. When Australia left, New Zealand quickly followed suit, probably to watch Australia in case something happened to him. Even though New Zealand was technically younger than Australia, he was definitely the more responsible twin. So that just left me and Canada walking down the hallway. So, what was all of that about? With father, I mean. Canada asked hesitantly, finally stopping his daydreams. Was it about, you know... Yes, it was, I said rather forcefully. I didn't like to be reminded of my mistakes, but then I softened a little. But thanks for not talking about it in front of Ozzy and Kiwi. Yeah, I figured you wouldn't like it. Plus, then they'd be all curious, and I knew you'd start panicking and make up a dumb lie. Canada smiled. They're right, you know. You really are a terrible liar. Oh, I'm wounded. How could you say such a thing? I put my hand on my chest in the most overdramatic fashion I could. I may be a terrible liar, but I was a fantastic actor. Or at least that's what I told myself anyway. Canada and I continued joking around as we walked, having a good time we hadn't had in a while because of all the princely things we were supposed to do. Not that I always did them. I found them boring. Eventually, Canada realized he had something to do, so he excused himself and left me alone with my thoughts. I kept walking. The castle we lived in was huge, one of the biggest in the whole land. How we didn't get lost in here was a mystery to everyone, including us. But still, we knew our way around, and so within minutes I'd made it to my favorite spot in the whole castle. It was a garden, a ways from the main hall and the ballroom. The garden itself wasn't big, but somehow my mother's assistant, Paris, had managed to keep roses growing even in the winter months. The roses came in all sorts of colors, from the classic red, pink, and white, to even purple and blue. How she grew them, I would never know, but I loved the flowers anyways. And since I didn't have anything else better to do, besides the work that I definitely wasn't going to, I stayed in the garden just thinking. What's going to go wrong at this masquerade? Chapter 2, The Mask. So, do you think we should go with this one or this one? Canada asked, holding up 2 different suits. Canada had asked for help in picking out his outfit for the ball, and since Australia and New Zealand were too busy with their own outfits, I was the one he turned to. And that's how I ended up sitting cross-legged on Canada's bed, watching him pull out different suits from his wardrobe before he asked me what I thought. I thought they all looked the same. I groaned. Can, I don't know. You know I suck at fashion. I know, but still, Canada said, putting both suits back. Look, if it matters that much to you, go ask Paris or something. I cut him off, not wanting to listen to him rant about the very slight differences in a suit. It's not like I'd be able to tell anyway. Canada looked at the two suits again thoughtfully, before choosing one and laying it gently on the bed in front of me. As he put the other suit back in the wardrobe, he asked me, "What about you? What are you going to wear?" I shrugged. No idea. I was planning on just wearing the same thing I usually wear. Canada gave me a look. Seriously? If you did that, I think Dad would straight up murder you. Leaning back in the bed, I replied, well, it'd be worth it to see his face. Plus, I can make my own decisions. Thank you very much. My younger brother sighed. May, look, I know you really don't want to attend this ball, but I don't want you getting on Dad's bad side. I don't think Ozzy and Kiwi remember what happened last time. You mean when I threw all his tea into the river? I said, and Canada nodded. Look, Can, I don't think any punishment can be as bad as that. But you never know, Canada reasoned, and with a sigh I gave in. All right, fine, dress me up all fancy-like. I grinned, and Canada grinned back, before starting his descent into the world of fashion. Almost an hour and a half later, Canada had given me a white suit with gold accents. Are we done yet? I whined, and Canada jokingly glared at me to shut me up. Almost. He adjusted my collar a little before stepping back to admire his handiwork. Perfect. Okay, so I've got the suit. Is that all? Can I go now? I asked, and once again Canada gave me the look. Aren't you forgetting something? And I thought for a moment before replying. I'm probably forgetting a lot of things. Canada sighed. It's a masquerade, America. That means you have to wear a mask. Oh, is that what that means? I said, actually confused, because I'm an idiot. Canada rolled his eyes, but there was a smile there, too, so I knew he wasn't mad. Let me guess, you don't have one. I hung my head sadly and shook my head. Well, you're in luck. I look up to see Canada smirking like he planned it all along, which, knowing him, he might have. He pulled out a wrapped package from his pocket and handed it to me. Go ahead, open it. What is this, Christmas, eh? I joked, but I opened the package anyway. Inside was a very intricate masquerade mask. White with gold designs like vines all around it. It could have looked cluttered, but it was well made with all the vines intertwined in just the right way. The mask was so well done that I knew it was unique, one of a kind, even though I knew very little about Masquerade. I looked up at my brother in shock. How did you know? Better question, why did you? Only the best for my brother, Canada replied, smiling, happy knowing I loved his gift. Well, what about you? I asked with a smile, slowly wrapping the mask back in the package. The ball was still at least 2 hours away, and I didn't want to mess anything up in that time. Oh, I got one too, but it's not as fancy as yours, but it'll do. Canada pulled another mask out of the other pocket and showed it to me. Similar to mine, the mask itself was white, but it had a little red rhinestones around the left and right sides. Definitely not as well made as the mask Canada had gotten for me, but it was still pretty. Geez, Canada, why didn't you spend all the money on your mask instead of mine? I asked, still in shock about the level of intricacy of the mask I'd gotten. Because I'm not the one who needs to impress all the ladies. Canada smirked. I groaned. Don't remind me. Father had insisted that since we were having this ball, I should get to know some of the ladies from neighboring kingdoms, so that I could possibly find someone who I possibly could marry. Honestly, I think this is why Father was having this ball in the first place, and I was not having it. Well, you didn't have to make me so admirable. You know I don't want to do this. I grumbled, but I was really happy that my little brother cared enough about me to help me with my father's wishes. Hey, it's not my fault that most people find you attractive. You just have to find that special someone. Canada turned away from me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get ready. Obediently, I left Canada's room, and he closed the door behind me. I tried to think of where we were supposed to go after we got ready, because I had forgotten. I sighed and knocked on Canada's door again. Clearly, my little brother was expecting this, because he just yelled, "Go to the dining hall!" And so, I took my leave, headed towards the dining hall. When I arrived, I saw Australia and New Zealand already there, sitting in their seats talking to Father and Mother. Australia and New Zealand were wearing matching navy blue suits with white accents, which really fit them. Mother was wearing a black sleeveless dress, and Father was wearing his fancy suit. I couldn't really tell the difference between his fancy suit and his regular suit. But that might just be me. I suck at fashion. Moishir! Sibum! France exclaimed with a smile as I walked in. I assume Canada helped you out with that. The French roughly translates to, "My dear, it's good." "No, you know me so well," I joked, sitting in my seat across from Australia. "Where is he, by the way?" Britain asked, rather impatiently. "He's coming," I answered plainly, not wanting to deal with the situation any more than I had to. "He'd better be," Father responded, straightening his tie. There was a pause before New Zealand broke the awkward silence by asking, "Did Canada give you his gift?" "Yep," I smiled back. "He worked really hard to get that for you, you know," Australia added. "I bet he did. It looks amazing." We fell back into silence, but before long, Canada came into the room. "Sorry I made you wait, Dad," he apologized, and I rolled my eyes with a grin. Britain looked up and replied, "That's okay, Canada." And with that, we were all in attendance. Chapter 3. The Rules. Since everyone was now present, we turned to our father, waiting for him to lay out some guidelines for what we were and were not allowed to do. Britain cleared his throat. "Tonight, since it's a special occasion, I've decided to let you have mostly free rein over what you do." We all looked at each other in excitement. Our father never lets us choose what we could do. There had always been strict rules, and those rules had only gotten stricter after what happened 2 years ago. Clearly, Father saw the excitement on our faces and repeated, "You can mostly have free rein. You are not allowed to purposefully prank someone into getting lost." That was a little game we played sometimes, to see how lost we could get our guests in the castle. Obviously, that game was not going to happen tonight. "You are not to bring your pets into the ballroom." Pointed look at Australia. "You are not allowed to bring anyone away from the ballroom unless you have specific permission from me or your mother." Glance at Canada. We all nodded. The rules made sense so far. And lastly, father finished, remember that all of you are not of age yet, therefore are not allowed to consume any alcoholic beverages. Even without looking, I felt my father's gaze bore into me. I knew better than to drink. I remembered what happened last time. The moment seemed to last for an eternity, and right as I felt my limits being pushed, I heard my father say, "So long as you follow these rules, you can do whatever you please." I breathed a sigh of relief. Both Ozzy and Kiwi looked at me quizzically, but I ignored them. I was about to ask my father why he was lifting all the restrictions now, when it seemed like he would tighten them even more, but then I caught his eye, and I saw something there that I hadn't seen in a long time. Trust. Britain was trusting me to make the right decision, and I wasn't about to let him down. "My amor, shouldn't we be preparing?" Mother asked father. "La famille is going to be arriving soon, no?" The French roughly translates to "my love" and "the family." Father nodded solemnly, as if he was dreading the idea of seeing family, which he probably was. He was never a fan of big family reunions. The first to arrive were my uncles on my father's side, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and England. Even though my father was the youngest out of all of them, you probably wouldn't be able to tell just by looking at them. Britain was definitely the most responsible member of the family, and everyone knew it. England came in close second, but even he let my father take the lead. "Oi, Britain! It's been a while since you've thrown a party," Scotland exclaimed, throwing his arm around his younger brother. "I'm not really one for large-scale gatherings, you know," Father grumbled, pushing Scotland's arm off of him. "Well, so long as you've got yourself some of the good stuff, we'll all be happy, right?" Ireland grinned, and Britain shivered. I watched as Father got pulled away by his brothers, and I knew we wouldn't see him for at least a couple hours. This happened every time we'd invited family over for a party. We weren't sure what they did, and Father refused to talk about it. But we had some suspicions that it involved good old family bonding over a beer keg. Next to arrive was Mother's cousin Spain and his kids Mexico, Chile, Argentina, and Peru, along with Portugal and his kid, Brazil. Brazil almost immediately ran off together towards Ozzy's room, and I couldn't help but smile over remembering how they'd bonded over Australia's pets a few years back, and had remained good friends to this day. I walked over to Mexico. She was about my age, and we were pretty good friends, even if we didn't see each other that often. "Hola, America." She smiled. "Hello, Mexico. It's been a while." I grinned back. Mexico gave me a hug, and the two of us walked while everyone else just hung out for a little. We teased Canada and Peru about how they looked so similar that they could be brothers, as we always did when we were together. It was a thing. But it still was weird how similar Canada and Peru looked. After a few minutes of us just hanging out, France, Spain, and Portugal all came over to us to tell us that we had to get ready. "Vale, niños, tenemos que prepararnos ahora. Los invitados estarán aquí pronto," Spain said to all his kids, and they all nodded. The Spanish roughly translates to, "Okay, kids, we have to prepare now, the guests will be arriving soon." Canada, New Zealand, and I just looked at him in confusion. Luckily, Mexico seemed to notice our confusion and quickly translated. "He says that people are going to be here soon, and so we have to get ready." I smiled at Mexico, and she smiled back before turning back to her father. "Vale, papa." She looked around a little before asking, "Tengo que sacar algo de muy nebuloso. Me lo puedo dar? Spanish roughly translates to, okay, Dad. I have something in my bag. Can I go get it? Sí, pero rápido. Spain nodded, and Mexico quickly headed to the other room. Mis chieres, can you go get Australia and Brazil? Mother asked. New Zealand, Canada, and I all shared a glance. And without saying a word, New Zealand sighed. Fine, I'll go get him. Thanks, Kiwi. I shot a grateful look at my little brother, who just rolled his eyes. And don't forget your masks. Everyone should have them on when the guests arrive. France called as we walked away. I don't get why you didn't want to get Aussie, New Zealand commented. We just gave him a look. Just because most of its pets are deadly doesn't mean... He started, but cut himself off mid-sentence. Never mind. I'm starting to see the issue now. He quickly excused himself, heading off to grab Australia and Brazil, and we continued walking. We walked in silence for a little before Canada broke it. Let me guess, you left your mask in my room. No, why in the world would you think I did that? I said sarcastically, in such a way that immediately showed that it was true. Canada chuckled. Yep, classic May. We walked a little more before Canada broke the silence again. Hey, May, are you actually going to try and find a lady at this ball? He looked at the ground awkwardly. I sighed. I don't know. I guess it depends. I gave my brother a wonky smile. Quickly, I ducked into my brother's room to grab a mask. But before I left, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. I stared for a moment before I made a decision. I was going to try at this ball. I was going to try and make my father happy. Chapter 4, The Ball, Part 1. When Canada and I arrived back in the main hall, this time with our masks already on, the room was full of people. And when I said full, I meant full. Mother was trying to herd everyone into the ballroom, because that was a bigger space and could fit more people. Just looking around, I recognized some people, like Mexico, who already had a yellow mask with little bits of red and green mixed in, and Argentina, who had a light blue mask with spots of white and yellow. But there were more people who I didn't recognize. There was a boy wearing a white mask with red and blue accents, standing next to a girl who had a similar mask but without the blue, and another boy with a red and blue mask, cutting out the white altogether. They seemed to be related, but I wasn't sure if I had ever seen them before. If I had, it'd been too long ago to remember. I was starting to get a little claustrophobic in such a crowded and compact place until I got pulled aside by someone. Oi, mate, you gotta watch out. You can't just go wandering into the crowd like that. We'll lose you in an instant. A familiar accent said, and I saw Australia standing next to me, wearing a blue mask with white stars scattered around. Brazil popped up beside Aussie, wearing a green mask with green and yellow feathers sticking out from the corners. Come on, Aussie, give the cara a break. Rough translation of the Portuguese is guy. Another possible translation is face, but I'm pretty sure with context we can all see that that is supposed to be guy. Yeah, Oz, New Zealand commented, coming up from behind. He was wearing a similar mask to Australia, only there were less stars, and the stars were red. There was a sigh as Canada came from behind Kiwi. What did Aussie do now? Where is everyone coming from? I asked, seriously confused as to why everyone was coming over to us. Because nothing interesting is happening over there, mi amigo. Mexico whispered in my ear, making me jump. Don't do that! I felt my face heat up as everyone started laughing at my reaction. Lo siento, America. Mexico apologized, so giggling a little. I couldn't help myself. The Spanish means I'm sorry. I huffed, but it was good-natured. Before long, we had finally managed to get to the ballroom, and I watched Mexico's shock to the grandeur of the room. The ballroom was only reserved for special occasions or parties, and it was usually off-limits for us. However, me being who I am, I liked to sneak into this room as a child and have wild fantasies about balls and meeting many people and altogether having a good time. That was before the disaster ball that happened 2 years ago. After that, I couldn't even force myself to look at the doors of the ballroom, let alone go inside. But somehow, being in the space, surrounded by the sound of chatter and excitement, made the whole room appear in a whole different light. We mostly hung around the walls of the room, not really wanting to get into the heat of it. Then would come all the questions about my future plans, and I really didn't want to go there right now. Unfortunately, as much as I wanted to, I couldn't cower or wave for the whole time, and eventually Canada nudged me to go talk to people. Come on, you gotta talk to at least one lady. Learn her name. I'm sure that'll be enough to satisfy Dad. Canada insisted, and I had to admit he was right. I quickly glanced around before I saw the girl from earlier, hanging out with the 2 boys from before, along with another boy wearing a red mask and yellow stars. And I made my way over to them before I could change my mind. How are you doing tonight? I asked the girl, and she smiled a bit. I'm doing fine, thank you. She did a little bow. Konnichiwa. I am Princess Japan. These are my brothers, Princes North and South Korea. She motioned to a guy with a red and blue mask, and to the other one with a white mask. And this is my good friend China. She gestured to the boy in a red mask. It's nice to meet you, Japan, I said, choosing not to add the royal title. Japan seemed to notice, and she gave me a smile. I hung out with them for a while. Japan was really nice, and South Korea, while quiet, was friendly too. On the other hand, both North Korea and China have a little of a menacing vibe. Something along the lines of, if you take one step out of line, I will end you right here and now. After a while, North Korea started glaring at me rather intensely, and I quickly found an excuse to leave. I didn't know where to go, so I just wandered around until I bumped into Canada, who was with another girl wearing a blue and yellow mask. So, how'd it go? I saw you hanging out with that girl over there. It was all right. I didn't bother elaborating. Care to introduce me to your lady? Canada just started blushing, but the girl just laughed. I assume you are America. Canada has told me about you. Quite a lot, actually. She smiled. My name is Ukraine. It's a pleasure to meet you, Ukraine. I gave her a smile. I hung out with Canada and Ukraine for a little bit, mostly because I didn't have anything to do. A servant was slowly making their way around the room, carrying a tray of champagne. When they came this way, I turned my back to them. It wasn't their job to check who was getting the drinks. They were just passing out. I learned that last time, and I wasn't about to make the same mistake that I'd made 2 years ago. After a while, I was getting bored again, so I started looking around to see if there was anyone I could hang out with. Australia and Brazil were nowhere to be found, assumedly having left to play with Aussie's animals. Mexico was flirting with a guy wearing a red mask. Canada was still talking with Ukraine, and that's when I saw Phil. Phil, short for Philippines, used to be my friend. We were really close, to the point of doing almost everything together. But ever since the mistake we made, we haven't talked to each other. It brings up things we'd both rather forget. My brain went on autopilot, and I searched for the nearest exit to the room, and made my way over to it. Subconsciously, I noticed New Zealand hanging out with someone, but I ignored it. I was looking past for someone to hang out with. Before I'd registered my surroundings, I had left the ball. But now, the real question was, where do I go now? Chapter 5, The Ball, Part 2. I stood in the middle of the hallway, trying to decide where to go. I could go back to the ball, but there was a chance I could see Phil again, and I'd rather not go through that again. I could leave the party entirely and just hide out in my room until everyone left, but I didn't know how late everyone was going to be up, so I still wanted to hang out with some of my friends. I could spontaneously run away from the castle and live out in the woods for 5 years, with my family having no idea where I'd gone, but that was unreasonable and not a good idea in the first place. In the end, I decided to just hang out in the garden to clear my head before eventually heading back to the party. So I stood in the garden, admiring the roses and trying to think of anything but the party. Suddenly, I heard a rustle come from around some bushes behind me, and I whipped around. Someone was trying to get through the bushes into the garden. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" I asked, putting on my best royal commander voice. Trying to get in?" the person said, straightening as much as he could in the awkward position he was currently in. "Well, I can see that," I said snarkily before I sighed. "All right, fine. You can come over." He tried to wriggle his way over the top of the bush, but only succeeded in making himself more stuck. "Do you need some help?" I offered hesitantly, watching as the man struggled more. "No thanks, I think I've got it." He tried again to get himself unstuck, but he slowly realized that he wasn't going to be able to get out of the bush, and looked up to me. "On second thought, can you?" I got what he was getting at, and I walked over to help pull him out of the bush. After a second, he fell out of the bush. "You know, there's a better way to get into the castle than the bushes on the side," I commented after a brief pause. The man just rolled his eyes. "You think I would have come that way without the reason? No, I wasn't invited." He paused before rephrasing. "Actually, more like I was invited, but wasn't allowed to come." I laughed. Man, I wish I could have skipped the party. Then I sighed. But my father insisted that I attend, something about finding a lady for me. I think the whole thing is dumb, but there's no arguing with my father, that's for sure. I leaned down on the walls of the garden. We were a little closer to the light now, and I could tell 3 things about him. First, he was tall, and by tall, I mean he towered over me. And I was one of the tallest members of my family. Second, he was already wearing a masquerade mask, and it shimmered with 3 stripes of color, white, blue, and red. Lastly, his eyes were amber in color, and in the dim light of the garden, they sparkled in such a way that had me immediately entranced. Me and the man talked for a little. Talking mostly about ourselves, I talked about my siblings, and he told me about his. He said he had 3 siblings, just like me, but he had 2 sisters and a brother. They should be here, at this ball, my siblings. He glanced towards the entranceway. You can go in if you want. I'm sure nobody will notice anything too out of the ordinary, once you're inside. I shrugged, and he just nodded silently. Hey, if you want, I'll come with you so it looks like we left the room together, I offered, and he looked relieved. We walked inside, and I showed him the way to the ballroom. He looked totally bewildered the whole way there, so I figured he'd never been inside the castle before. Plus, there was that rule that we couldn't get guests lost, and even though technically he wasn't a guest, I didn't want him losing his way. As we walked into the ballroom, he looked a little nervous, but I ignored it and told him, "Here we are, the ballroom. I hope you find your siblings. There's a lot of people in here." Another silent nod, and then he walked away, looking for his siblings. It was only after he'd walked away that I realized I never got his name. I looked into the crowd for him, but there were just too many people. "Hey, May, where'd you go? We've been looking for you." Canada came over to me. I went to the garden for a little. I kept my response brief, still looking for the man I'd met in the garden. Canada seemed to notice my distraction and smirked. "Did someone finally catch your fancy?" I thought about the man's amber eyes and how they'd sparkled in the light of the garden, and I responded, "I think quite possibly so." Canada wrapped his arm around my shoulder. "Now that's what we're looking for." I looked at my little brother. Despite being younger than me, he was actually a few inches taller than me and had vowed to always hold it over my head. Pun probably intended. Mentally, I compared the height of my brother and the man, and even still, the man was taller. Canada must have noticed me looking at him weird, because he said, "May, are you okay? You're acting kind of strange." I looked my brother dead in the eyes before replying with a smile. "I've never been better." Before Canada could respond, I walked away from him, determined to find someone else to talk to. Luckily, I walked over to one of my best friends, Germany, and his friend, Poland. Germany was wearing a black mask with almost devil-like horns attached to the top, and, contrastingly, Poland was wearing a white mask covered in feathers. I'd been friends with Germany for a couple of years, and while I didn't know Poland as well as I would have liked to, I still knew him well enough to strike up a normal conversation with them. "Amerika, guten Abend. It's been a while." Germany gave me a warm smile. Their German roughly translates to "good evening." "Germs, it's good to see you." I gave Germany a cheeky smile, knowing full well he hated that nickname. He gave me an unimpressed look, and I laughed. "Germany, you know I meant no harm by it." I gave my friend a warm smile, and he smiled back. "So, how are you two doing?" I asked, noticing how close Germany and Poland seemed to be. "You seem a lot closer than when I last saw you two." Then again, the last time I saw them was 2 years ago, and a lot can change in 2 years. "Oh, Poland..." Germany trailed off, looking at the ground awkwardly, and Poland jumped in to help. "Niemcy and I are together now." Poland smiled, looking at Germany with a loving expression. I had to do a double take. "Wait, you and Germany? Together? Like in a relationship?" Germany nodded silently, clearly embarrassed by the whole situation. "I thought your dad hated Poland." I looked at Germany questioningly. "Oh, he does." Poland nodded seriously. "He absolutely despises me. But we decided to take that risk." Then he looked around before continuing. "So long as he doesn't know. If he finds out, I'm as good as dead." I hung out with Germany and Poland for the rest of the night. At some point, Canada came over and spent some time with us as well, but I couldn't really focus. Something was nagging me, and I wasn't sure what it was. Chapter 6: The Dream. The rest of the evening passed rather quickly. Nothing else really happened, and eventually all the guests started to leave as it got later into the night. Poland and Germany were some of the last to leave, which I was thankful for, because it meant I didn't have to go looking for someone to hang out with. As usual, the last people left were our family, and Mother always insisted on letting them stay over. We still hadn't seen Father since his brothers dragged him off, and since none of us were willing to go see what they were doing, we agreed to let them continue, and in the morning, we'd check on them. "Mashiri, can you show Mexico to the guest room?" Mother asked, and I nodded. It was a couple doors down from my room, and it was on the way, so better to kill two birds with one stone. As I showed Mexico to her room, she then yawned and started speaking rapid-fire Spanish, so fast I couldn't even process the words coming out of her mouth. "Mexico, English, please?" I asked, and she blinked. "Oh, lo siento, America. When I get tired, it's hard for me to switch between Inglés y Español, and the languages start to mix. No tiene nada de malo." Translations are, "I'm sorry," and "nothing bad meant." It's what I can guess. I didn't ask her for a translation this time. Mexico kept talking, the Spanish and English blending together, so I couldn't fully understand what she was saying, but I got the general gist of it. Before long, we arrived at the guest room, tentatively called that, because it was pretty much Mexico's room in our castle. Our family didn't really come over that often, but when they did, it was pretty much a requirement that they stay over. And since there were so many rooms in our house anyway, everyone got their own personal bedroom to stay in and decorate as they please. Of course, Mother always insisted on calling them the guest rooms, because technically anyone could use it, but we all knew she was just trying to be polite. "Alright, well, here we are." I stopped and put my hands on my hips. "Here's your room, Mex." "Gracias, amigo." Mexico smiled, and I smiled back. I walked a few doors down until I got to my room. Before, I turned back to Mexico, who was standing in the same spot. "Good night, Mexico," I waved. "Buenas noches, America." Mexico waved back, and then we both ducked into our rooms. The first thing I did when I got to my room was take off the suit. I hated wearing suits. They were so tight and formal. I didn't mind wearing them for short periods of time, like if I was meeting someone, but staying in a suit for hours on end always made me feel confined, and I hated it. I took off the suit and threw it in the corner of my room, in a way that would make every fashion person in the world cringe. I quickly changed into the much more comfortable long t-shirt and shorts, which were my go-to pajamas, and I flopped down on my bed, and fell asleep almost instantly. My dreams were messy, to say the least. One moment, I was reliving a childhood memory playing with my best friend, Phil. The next, my father's yelling at me for something. At one point, I caught a glimpse of those amber eyes, but they quickly changed into Canada's soft brown ones, wide in shock before disappearing entirely. A memory, this one of me in Mexico playing as children. Then I was on my bed, another person snuggled up to me and breathing softly next to me. An image flashes before my eyes, one of Canada and his lady, Ukraine. After a moment, and the image is gone, replaced by Japan smiling next to her two brothers. Another moment, I see Germany and Poland smiling and laughing with each other. Yet another moment, and my friends are replaced by Mexico and the man I saw with her face across the ballroom. Then, images flew by in a flurry, fast enough to get a sense of familiarity, but not enough to look at them, see them in their full light. After a few moments, the images slowed for me to catch a picture of Australia and Brazil, playing with Aussie's pets. Then, once again, the scene changes and my father's yelling again. The dream ends suddenly with me, back in the garden with the man, staring into his amber eyes, sparkling in the dim light. I hear my name being called, and I open my eyes, sitting up in bed. Sunlight is streaming through the window into my room, so it must be morning already. My head was already reeling, trying to comprehend the strange dream I had. And having very little sleep last night probably didn't help any. "America, wake up!" I could hear Canada running down the hallway. "If you're not up and ready in 10 minutes, I have given Aussie full permission to use his pets against you." I yawned and got out of bed, and opened my door. Why would you give Aussie permission to do that against anyone? I asked, startling my younger brother. When I looked up at Canada, I couldn't help but think of the wide, shocked eyes my brother had in the dream last night, and I instantly flicked my eyes away. "Well, I didn't know you were awake," Canada said, obviously not noticing my avoidance of eye contact. "You're the last one up. Everyone else is already at the dining hall, ready for breakfast." I left the door open a crack before throwing on a more proper outfit. Not as tight as a suit from last night, but a lot more princely than the t-shirt and shorts I was currently wearing. Once I was satisfied with my outfit, I opened the door again and joined Canada in the hallway. "What's for breakfast, do you know?" I asked my brother because I was really hungry. "Pancakes, I think," Canada smiled, and I knew he was just as hungry as I was. Plus, he really loved pancakes. We soon arrived in the dining hall, and just like Canada had said, everyone was there except for my father, who had still yet to make an appearance after getting taken away by his brothers. "So, Ozzy, tell me," I slid into my seat, "how long was it before you and Brazil left the party?" Australia looked at me, a little surprised to see me up, but he thought about the question for a bit before responding. "About an hour and a half, I'd say." "Oi, sounds about right," he asked Brazil, who nodded. "So you ditched us for animals you literally see every day?" I gasped, over-dramatically. "I guess you don't care about us after all." Australia laughed, but didn't try to deny it. Argentina, Peru, and Chile looked at me strangely. Clearly, they hadn't spent enough time with us to get used to me. Mexico, on the other hand, was enjoying the light banter between me and my brothers. After messing with Ozzy, it was now Kiwi's turn, and I turned to my little brother. "What about you? Did you find yourself a lady?" I asked, raising my eyebrows. New Zealand just blushed and stayed quiet, which I took as a yes. "Come on, little bro, tell us about her," I urged my brother on, but he didn't budge. He wouldn't spill a single bean about this girl he met. I would have continued egging New Zealand on, but suddenly the door slammed open and my father stormed into the room. Chapter 7. The Breakfast. When my father burst into the room, everyone instantly got quiet. It didn't take a genius to see that father was mad. Both his hair and his tie somehow had become a mess overnight, which was odd because France never let his outfit become anything more than crisp. His eyes had a fire in them, burning so brightly I could tell he wasn't just mad, he was extremely pissed off. And if I was lucky, I would get to watch him yell at someone who wasn't me. He grumbled something about Ireland, Scotland, and beer before finally looking up to see all the people at the table. "What the bloody hell are you all still doing here?" Father exclaimed, frustrated. "Mom told them they could stay over," Canada answered, his voice shaky. Father whipped around to stare at Canada, and my brother cowered down under his glare. They stayed for a second before Father sighed and looked away. Of course she did. Then he turned to Argentina, Chile, Mexico, Peru, and Brazil. "Finish your breakfast, and then get out." The distant family all nodded, their eyes wide in fear, before trying to eat their remaining food as fast as they could. Father didn't sit down. He just stood in the same place staring at them, which only made them eat faster. I shared a glance with my brothers, all of us thinking the same thing. What was he so mad about this time? There was a moment where no one spoke, and the only sounds in the room came from the scraping of silverware against the plates. It didn't take long for our family to finish their breakfast, especially since my father was basically forcing them to hurry up. When they all finished, they practically ran out of the dining hall, eager to get out of my father's sight before he exploded on them. Once they'd left, Father finally sat down in his usual spot at the head of the table. Luckily, no one had sat in his seat. They would have had their head chewed off before they even saw it coming. A beat passed before Australia cleared his throat and spoke. "So, Dad, what happened?" There was definitely some hesitation in his voice, but I had to give him props for asking. Your uncles Ireland and Scotland are complete and utter fools, Britain said, clearly not in the mood to talk about it. More silence. Clearly, Father noticed this, and he snapped at us. Don't just sit there like statues. Talk. We still didn't talk. Father sighed rather loudly and frustratedly. America, tell me, did you meet anyone at the ball? Anyone catch your interest? Yes, actually, I answered, thinking back to those amber eyes yet again. There you go. I knew you'd eventually find someone. Britain smiled and looked over at Australia, probably to criticize him for leaving the ball as early as he did. I couldn't focus. My father, King Britain, had found my efforts at the ball acceptable. And not only that, but I had impressed him, even when he was so angry at his brothers that he could probably stab them. I felt like I was floating. I had made my father happy with my efforts. For the first time in 2 years, Father hadn't looked at me like I was disgraced to the name of the family. The whole rest of breakfast I couldn't focus, even when my mother came in and Father started arguing with her about letting our family stay over. I only focused on the conversation when I heard the names of Spain and Mexico being thrown around. I zoned back in to find Mother was talking. Don't you see? He thinks it will be best for his daughter, Mother insisted. We have enough people to take care of now. We don't need any more, Father argued back. I leaned over to Australia, who sat on my right. What's going on? I wasn't paying attention. Ozzy rolled his eyes, before explaining the situation. Spain asked Mom and Dad if they'd allow Mexico to stay with us for a little, while her siblings all come home with him. Why? I asked, slightly confused. My brother just shrugged. Not sure. Mexico wanted it? I don't know why. You'd have to ask her. I sat back in my chair, thinking, why would Mexico want to stay with us? Once again, I turned back to my parents, who seemed to have finished off their argument, and were instead just huffing at each other. Excuse me, Mother, Father? I said, standing up. I was wondering if I might be able to leave. I have some things to attend to. Both of my parents looked up at me in surprise. I never had things to attend to. Yes, America, you may leave, my father answered, in a rather unsure manner, acknowledging my formal statement. Thank you. I smiled. I caught my brother's baffled gazes, but I didn't comment, and left the hall without another word. As soon as I left the room, I ducked down a hallway towards my room, but about halfway there, I stopped. I needed some time alone to think and get my thoughts in order. My mind had been racing ever since the ball began, and I wasn't sure what to think anymore, so I changed my course and headed towards the garden instead. When I arrived, there was a slight breeze, and all the trees around started to move gently, producing a soft sound. I sighed and started to comb through the tangled web of my mind. I thought about all the new people I had met, all the old friends I had seen, and all the people I hadn't personally known, but seemed to be close to people I did know. In the first category fell Japan, her brothers, North and South Korea, China, and Ukraine. All of them seemed really nice, except for North and China, but I'm sure if I got to know them better, we'd be buds. There was also the mysterious man that tried to sneak in through the garden. There was something about him that I found intriguing, and I just wanted to learn more about him. In the second category were Germany and Poland. I hadn't seen them in years, and in that time they had gotten a lot more friendly towards each other, even to the point where they were now in a relationship. I had to admire their courage. I don't think I would have done that if I were to consider how much Germany's dad hates Poland. But there was something about them that was bugging me. Even still, I wasn't sure what it was. Also in the second category was Phil, but I wasn't ready to think about him yet. Sometimes I wish we could just go back on how our friendship was before the incident that happened 2 years ago. but the mistakes that were made were just too big. There was no coming back from something like that. Lastly, in the third category, I placed two people. The man I saw Mexico with, who strangely appeared in my dream, and whoever New Zealand had fallen for. I didn't know exactly who they were or what they looked like, but I did have a fuzzy image of him standing with a person wearing a green and red mask that I didn't remember seeing at all. So I figured that must have been it. At some point, my thoughts shifted, and they became a lot less focused. I thought about Japan and how nice she seemed. I thought about her brother, North Korea, who seemed to really hate me in particular. And then again, my thoughts changed, and I found myself thinking more about the man again. I remembered every detail of the scene. The way his eyes sparkled in the dim light, the way his mask shimmered. Time flew by, and before I knew it, London was coming to get me. "Your Highness, your father wishes to see you," London said, in the most professional-sounding voice. "All right, thank you." I stood up straighter. "Where is he?" "He's in his office, sir." I groaned inwardly. Of course he was. I thanked London again, and made my way into the castle. Why'd Father have to meet me in his office? Chapter 8. The Argument. "Ah, America, I've been looking all over for you." Father smiled at me. I knew it was fake. He never called me into his office unless he wanted to yell at me about something. "It's not like I was hiding or anything," I replied snarkily. Father's smile fell. "I wanted to ask you about the ball last night. Did you think it was pleasant?" "Yeah, I suppose. Besides the part where I almost had a panic attack." "Earlier today, you mentioned meeting someone of interest. Could you tell me about her?" For a second, I didn't register what my father had said, but when I did, it made me furious. "I never said the person of interest was a girl." I stood my ground. Father's frown deepened. "But you did meet a lady." "I did. I thought of Japan. But just like all the other ladies you've introduced me to, I haven't liked her like that." "Care to explain what you mean by like her like that?" "I'm not quite sure I know what you mean." I could tell Father was not pleased by the direction of this conversation was going, and I was not about to change it. "Every time you have introduced me to a lady, it's an attempt for me to fall in love. You want me to find a wife so that you can pass on the crown." I stood my ground. "If you want to pass the crown off to a son with a wife, then by all means skip me and give the crown to Canada. Goodness knows he's already gotten the proposal to Ukraine ready." Every word I said seemed to be a bullet, slowly wearing down the brilliant plan my father had been relying on for too long. "But I'm telling you now, nothing's ever going to change me and whomever you bring in next, because it's always going to end the same way," I continued. But suddenly I made a realization. I realized that what was nagging me about Germany and Poland, and why those sparkling amber eyes seemed to be everywhere I went. "And there's a reason to it, too," I said, slower than before, as I tried to put my thoughts into words. "It's not because I haven't met the right one, or haven't given them a chance. There's a reason that I don't have interest in them." I took a deep breath, knowing this was a statement that would shatter everything. "It's because I'm gay." My father did nothing. He just stared at me, total shock, disbelief, and anger written on his face. We stood there for a moment, me defiantly, Father defeatedly, before my father spoke. "Leave." It was a simple word, spoken softly, but with fury. "You are dismissed." As I turned to leave, Father grabbed his teacup and clenched it. Father never mistreated his teacups. I had made him mad. No, the emotion was more than mad. It was absolute hatred. I had only made him this angry once before. Years ago, a younger version of me watched as broken pieces of porcelain drifted down the river behind the castle, watching as he knew a severe punishment awaited him. I knew a severe punishment awaited me. I avoided father for the rest of the day. I had lunch later in the afternoon than I would normally, and I skipped dinner altogether, mostly because I had no appetite. I slept in really late the next morning, skipped breakfast, and spent most of the day alone in my room. Mostly, I just didn't want to see my father. At one point, both Canada and Mexico came to visit me, asking if I was okay. I told them I was, but I didn't give them any details. Eventually, Mexico gave up asking, realizing I wasn't going to spill, yet for some reason, Canada just became more insistent the more I put off his questions. "Come on, America!" Canada pushed. "I know there's something going on. You haven't left your room for 2 days straight. You don't talk to anyone, and every time I see Dad, he looks super ticked off. Something must have happened between you two." Canada stood there, awaiting an answer. I paused for a second, trying to figure out what to do, before I finally looked up at my younger brother. "You have to promise to not tell anyone, not even Mother," I said, already fighting the cracks in my voice. Canada nodded, and I knew he would be true to his word. If there was one thing Can was good at, it was keeping his promises. So I told him everything. Everything from the party, to the mystery man, who I still didn't know the name of, to the argument with Britain. My brother stayed quiet the whole time. He didn't interrupt me, which was a good thing, because the way I was going, if I stopped, I'm not sure I'd be able to start again. When I finished, Canada didn't say anything. He just kind of stood there and processed all of it. "So you're gay," he said. It wasn't a harsh statement, it was just a fact, and he said it like he was trying it out, as if seeing how it felt. Then he nodded again, this time mostly to himself. "I like it. It fits you." I smiled a little. My brother had restored a small amount of faith in me again, that maybe I wasn't permanently changed from who I was. Just because it wasn't what society had deemed appropriate didn't mean it wasn't who I was. "I can see now why he's so mad at you." Canada spoke in a rather quiet voice this time. It was true. He'd spent most of my life trying to find the perfect queen for me, and here I am, just basically telling him it was a waste of time. "What do you think I should do?" I buried my face into my pillow again. "I can't have him mad at me forever." "I think you know what you should tell him." Canada gave me a tense smile, and I winced. "I know, but you know what happened. What if it happened again? I can't, he would..." Canada cut me off. "America, that was 2 years ago. Plus, you know better. It wouldn't happen again. No matter how drunk you got. Just think about it. And come down for dinner. Everyone's worried about you." Canada left my room, and I was alone with my thoughts again. I sighed. Maybe Canada was right. Chapter 9. The Dinner. After Canada left, I had a decision to make. A quick glance at my clock told me I only had about half an hour before dinner, and I needed to decide whether or not I was going to go. In the end, I made up my mind to go. Not because I particularly wanted to see anyone, but more just because I hadn't eaten anything all day and I was starting to get hungry. I slipped into some more reasonable clothes, knowing that if I was going to see my father, it better be at least somewhat respectable, and quietly left my room. I walked to the dining hall in silence. I didn't feel like talking much, and I knew if I was with someone, they would try to force the story out of me like Mexico and Canada had done. When I got to the door of the dining hall, I peeked in, realizing it was the last chance for me to leave if I wanted to. Amirik, what are you doing, muy fils? Mother asked, and I knew the opening was gone. I took a deep breath and walked into the room. I avoided looking at Britain. Instead, I looked at the ground as I walked my way towards the seat at the table. Mate, what's wrong? We haven't seen you all day, Ozzy exclaimed as I sat down. You missed all the ruckus when Melbourne jumped on Mexico. She grabbed their shoe and almost was about to murder him. What else was I going to do? Of course I had to pull out the chancla. Mexico responded in a voice that was eerily calm. I shuddered, thinking about Mexico's chancla. Anyone in their right mind would get scared of that thing. Anyway, Australia continued, bringing the attention back to him. Luckily, I was able to save Melbourne, and he's alright now. Personally, I don't think anyone besides Australia and possibly Brazil would miss that spider if it died. I know I wouldn't. But enough about the spider. New Zealand cut off his twin, trying to refocus the conversation. May, what have you been doing? No one's seen you. I looked up from the table and glanced at my father, then immediately regretted it and looked back down. Not much. Nothing too interesting. Honestly, hearing about how Mexico almost killed Melbourne is much more entertaining than what I've been up to. New Zealand raised an eyebrow, clearly suspicious, but he didn't press. The rest of dinner passed rather uneventfully. People talked about their doings while I was away in hiding. I didn't add much to the conversation. I mostly just listened and stirred the food around on my plate, occasionally eating a small bite before continuing to stir the food around. Suddenly, being in the presence of my father made me lose all of my appetite all over again. I started to zone out for a bit, and I only zoned back in when I heard my name being called. I tried to refocus. Are you okay? Mexico asked from the seat next to me. You don't seem to be doing great. I sat up a little straighter in my chair. I'm fine. I can finish dinner. I'm just a little tired, is all. I caught a glance from Canada saying, You've been in bed all day, you shouldn't be tired. And I promptly ignored it. Mexico looked at me doubtfully. All right, if you say so. The dinner turned awkward, as no one really knew what to say. I was fine with that. It meant I didn't have to talk. There were some failed attempts at starting conversation from Aussie and Kiwi, but they eventually both gave up. I kept looking up at my father, who would just give me a glare, and I would instantly look back down. At one point, I was considering asking if I could be excused from the table to go hide in my room again, but one look at Britain shot down all hopes of that. I knew his strategy. He was going to wait until everyone else left the room and then confront and punish me. I knew the punishment was coming, and I wanted to delay it as long as possible. Australia cleared his throat, clearly attempting to start a conversation again. So, are there any more events that are coming up soon? Stuff we need to plan for? For a second, we all went quiet. Then Mexico spoke. Well, it is Canada y America's birthday coming up. Are you planning anything for it, Tio y Tia? I don't think we have anything planned, no, Mother admitted. We could hold another ball, New Zealand suggested out of nowhere. That one we just had was really fun. We used to hold balls for our birthdays a couple of years ago. I don't know why they stopped, but those were great. I, knowing full well why we stopped, didn't respond. But clearly, Britain noticed my lack of comment and looked my way. What do you think, America? It is your birthday. Britain spoke calmly. I didn't say anything, but Britain wasn't done. After all, what happened 2 years ago? Have you finally put that behind you? My father's tone became a bit more mocking, and yet again I stayed quiet. What exactly happened 2 years ago? Australia asked. You keep mentioning it, but you never actually say what went down. I sighed. Australia and New Zealand had a right to know, no matter how much embarrassment it caused me. Mexico was one of my closest friends, and she probably wanted to know just as much as anyone else. Canada already knew, of course, but the last part, the part that terrified me most, Britain, knew about as much as he was willing to hear. And then there was Phil. Not in the room with us, but I could feel him. Almost like he wanted the story to be out there. Not kept inside a little box, never to be opened or shown to anyone. So I took a deep breath. It's a long story. Chapter 10, The Flashback, Part 1. Two years ago. It was the night of America's 16th birthday. Well, technically his birthday wasn't for another couple of days, and the ball being thrown was for both his and Canada's birthdays. But to him, he felt on top of the world. He went around and talked to almost everyone, making sure to check that they were having a good time, and that everyone was. America was one of the most loved princes in all of the neighboring kingdoms, and boy did he know it. He was friends with so many people, it was hard for him to keep track. But there was one person America could always rely on. His best friend was the Philippines, but that was long and too formal of a name for America, so to keep it short, he called him Phil. In return, Phil called America Joe. It was only fair. While America was rowdy and always wanted to go off on wild adventures, Phil was a lot more reasonable, but still eager to go exploring when it really came down to it. And that's what made them such good friends. Phil and Joe did almost everything together, and they were always inviting the other over to their castles. If there was anyone who knew the Britannia castle as well as the family members, it was Phil. And considering how large the castle was, that was a pretty big feat. Phil even knew about the secret passageways hidden in the castle, the little dark hallways that only the servants were supposed to know about, but somehow America knew about them anyway. America and Phil had always spent their time crawling through the passageways, trying to see if there were any secret rooms hidden somewhere in the castle. So far, they hadn't found anything, but they weren't giving up. And despite the fact that there was a pretty large party going on, today was no different. Psst, Phil, I gotta show you something I found. America whispered into the darkness, knowing his friend was in there somewhere. What is it, Joe? Came the curious whisper back. America reached out to grab what he assumed was Phil's wrist and started to pull him down the hallway. Before long, their eyes started to adjust to the dark and they could see where they were going. I was doing some light exploring earlier today, and I happened to stumble across a room that I don't think I'm allowed in. America started talking. And I saw this table pretty close to the hidden entrance, so I reached in and grabbed it, and brought it away so no one would know. Then I stashed it in here so I could find it later. America gave his friend a wicked grin, and he could tell that Phil was beginning to get a little nervous. Joe, where's this going? Phil asked, and you could hear his voice waver a little. Look, I'm turning 16, right? I think I should be allowed to have a little fun. America's grin only widened as they slowed to a stop. America then knelt down by a grate and rummaged through it before pulling out a slim bottle. Phil gasped. Joe, is that? It's my mother's champagne, America said, a little too calmly for Phil's liking. Are you suggesting we get drunk? Joe, I know you want more freedom, but are you sure this is how you get it? Phil took a small step back. Come on, Phil. We'll just have a little bit. It's not like drinking is a big deal anyway. Have you seen Germany and Finland? They drink all the time. America rolled his eyes. Yeah, but... Phil tried to come up with a decent excuse, but nothing came to mind. Please, Phil. It's my birthday, after all. America pleaded, and Phil had to concede. All right, fine. Only a little bit. It took America and Philippines a while to successfully pour the champagne into 2 cups that America had stashed away in the grates, but when they did, they had a mini celebration. To Joe, and a happy birthday to him. Phil made a toast, and America followed with, to me. Then they clinked their plastic cups together and drank their cupful. It didn't take much to get them pretty drunk. At some point, Phil pointed out that it was rather dusty in the passageway, and so him and America opted to up and leave and head up to America's room. So they bottled up the champagne, put it and the cups back into the grate, and left the secret passageways, choosing to use the regular hallways instead. They were lucky enough to not run into anyone on the way, which was pretty good considering how mad both of their parents could get if they did something wrong. Eventually, they both made it to America's room, where they sat on his bed together. At first, they tried to hold a conversation, but that quickly died out and they sat in relatively comfortable silence. Phil, I gotta tell you something, America said suddenly, words slurring together a little on account of the alcohol. You look pretty hot right now, I gotta say. Oh? Phil questioned, also quite drunk, but less drunk than America. And then, in a drunken, uncoordinated way, America managed to kiss Phil, which slowly evolved into the two of them making out, which evolved into them cuddling together on the bed until they fell asleep. They stayed that way until the morning, and that's when everything went to hell. Chapter 11, The Flashback, Part 2. Both Phil and America woke up with a terrible hangover the next morning. As it was their first one, they had no idea what was happening and therefore were kind of panicked. They quickly got out of bed, getting ready for the day as much as they could without looking at each other. While Phil and America had gotten drunk, they hadn't gotten so drunk that they wouldn't remember what had happened. So, what had happened was now permanently engraved in both of their memories, a dark spot on what was once a beautiful friendship. Without talking to each other, the two of them left the room for the dining hall, where they expected to find their parents. When they arrived, there was only Britain and Del Pilar in the room. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, along with Phil's brother, Marshall, must have been sent off because the two fathers in the room seemed pretty mad. Where were you two last night? Britain asked in an eerily calm tone. We were hanging out together, America answered honestly. Where? We looked all over for you. This time, it was Del Pilar asking the question. Well, we started in the passageways, but then we went to America's room, Phil answered, wisely leaving out the part where they were drinking. All night? Another tense question. Both Philippines and America knew the next answer would either save or ruin them. Not all night, America tried to dodge the question, but right after Phil answered. We slept together. There was a silence, and then Phil realized his mistake. No, wait, I didn't mean it like that. Phil tried to correct it, but the damage had already been done. You slept with him? Filipinas, you are in big trouble. You are to go outside now, and we will have this conversation. Del Pilar bursted. And you are not allowed to see this puta ever again. Phil looked over at America. The despair was clear in his bright blue eyes. America waved sadly to his friend as he walked away from his life forever. The only people left in the room were Britain and America. The tension was thick. The two were silent. Whatever happened last night, you will not speak of it. You may have just ruined our reputation for years to come. But if nothing comes out, then nothing happened. Britain's calm demeanor had changed. Now it was altogether threatening. But we didn't sleep together. We just shared a bed. America tried to argue, trying to convince his father not to entirely disown him for an offhand comment. But Britain just cut him off. Nothing happened. You are not to tell anyone what happened. Britain's grip tensed. Not me, not the citizens, not even Canada. Absolutely nothing happened. America swallowed. Yes, sir. Britain seemed satisfied, although the threatening atmosphere seemed to linger. You are now dismissed. America left the room slowly, as if Britain were a sleeping bear, that he'd rather not provoke. After leaving the room, America bolted. He ran, not stopping until he reached his room. But he couldn't handle the thoughts swirling around in his brain. Too much at once. So again, he ran, this time down one of the dark passageways he knew so well. The thoughts and memories weren't gone, but at least, in the darkness, he could cry alone without anyone hearing. He hid in the dark for at least an hour or two before someone came looking for him. "America?" Someone called out. America didn't care enough to figure out whose voice it was. He just curled up into a little ball. "Go away," he said to whoever was looking for him. Unfortunately, his reply gave his location away, and the person came closer. "You're okay. It's me, Canada." America looked up to see it was, in fact, his brother crouching in front of him. He sighed and moved away a little, to allow Canada to sit by him. "What happened?" Canada asked gently, putting his arm around his brother's shoulder. "You wouldn't understand," America sniffed, wiping the tears away from his face. "You're only 14, after all." "That's only 2 years younger than you," Canada insisted. "But it doesn't matter if I understand. You clearly need someone to talk to, and I get the feeling that Dad isn't going to be that person." America sighed. "You're right, Can. And so America told him about his grave mistake, what had actually happened, and the misunderstanding between Phil and his father. However, there was a part of the story that America kept hidden, kept to himself, and that was how Britain had acted after Phil had left. Some part of him knew that it was just his father overreacting, making a big deal out of something that was really just a mistake, but another, larger part of him felt like it was the truth. Britain didn't care about his sons. He didn't care to hear what actually happened. All he cared about was his reputation, how he looked to the people he ruled. America didn't want to tell Canada this. Unlike him, his brother adored their father, loving him with all his heart. And knowing that their father didn't even care enough to step in and actually listen to what happened, that would break him. So America kept it a secret, and he carried that burden alone for years. America and Philippines no longer hung out. They avoided each other as much as they could, not wanting to bring back bitter memories. All the childhood memories went from pleasant to painful, literally overnight. Phil was no longer willing to go out of his way for shenanigans. His aura had become more hardened and serious, and he wasn't about to budge. America had changed too. He had become much more cautious, and while you could still find him willing to cause trouble if he was in a good mood, those days were few and far between, and the pranks pulled were a lot less intense in nature. For 2 years, America dreaded holding another ball of fear of making another mistake. And clearly, so did Britain, because no balls were held and birthday celebrations were kept between the family, which was totally fine with America. Until, of course, that fateful day 3 weeks ago. Chapter 12, The Passageway. It's a long story. I opened my mouth to explain, but my father cut me off again. And unfortunately, we do not have the time for it right now. Perhaps we can find time later. I sighed. Seems Britain hadn't forgotten our discussion either. I think holding another ball sounds like a magnifique idea. Mother smiled, trying to bring the conversation back. After all, America is turning 18. All eyes turned to me, looking for my say in the matter. You can do it if you want, I muttered, and instantly Australia and New Zealand's faces brightened. Pushing my chair back, I stood up. Now, if you'll excuse me, I would like to leave this conversation. See you all tomorrow. I turned to leave the room. I heard someone, most likely my father, calling me to sit at the table, but I ignored them. I wasn't in the mood for this. It was only after I'd left the table that I realized that I hadn't even finished my meal. I knew that as soon as dinner was finished, Britain would come looking for me, and I really didn't want to see him, so I needed to hide. My room was not an option. That was the first place they'd look. The garden, while tempting, wasn't good enough either. I felt too frustrated, too upset, and I didn't want to tamper with the delicate atmosphere the garden always held for me. There was only one place I could hide, and no one would find me for a while. The passageways. I hadn't been through them in a long time, 2 years to be exact, but I still knew them all by heart. And somehow I found myself wandering back the same hallway I'd been in 2 years ago when I'd made the worst mistake of my life. The bottle, while still on the ground, was empty. Good. No one deserved to have it, when it was the sole cause of my life going downhill. But all in all, it was a pretty decent hiding place. No one knew about it, and even if they did, they wouldn't bother looking for me in here. I sat on the dusty ground in a silence, thinking about the meal. I really didn't want to go to another ball. The one we just had was traumatizing enough, and I didn't want to go through all that again. But on the other hand, I did kind of want to see the mystery man again. I hadn't gotten any more information about him, mostly because he'd pushed away to the back of my mind with everything else going on. However, there was still something about him, and I really did want to see him again. And there was always the chance that by following the directions, I'd be able to make my way back onto my father's good side. I weighed the two options in my mind, trying to decide which one to go with. In the end, there was only one clear choice. But that didn't mean I wanted to go through with it right away. I wanted to hang out in the gloomy darkness of the passageways, just a little longer, for the sake of making up lost time. At some point, I heard footsteps heading in my direction, and I quickly pressed myself up against the wall, trying to avoid detection. I heard these passageways were only used by servants, and even though the use of them had declined, every now and then an old maid would remember them and go back down to check. Check what? We weren't sure. It was neither the condition of them or even that they were there at all. If it was indeed a servant, I would probably be in big trouble, and my father would be even more disappointed in me, ruining my chance to make things better. However, luck seemed to be on my side, as I heard the soft whisper of Canada's voice calling my name. But I still didn't want to talk, so I stayed against the wall and remained as silent as I could be. "Guess he's not here," Canada muttered to himself, before I heard the gentle footsteps retreating into another part of the passageways. I breathed out a sigh of relief. Canada definitely didn't know the passageways as well as I did. And even still, he wasn't there 2 years ago when he had no idea what had gone down in the same spot he had been standing. I knew I'd still have sanctuary for a few minutes, but fooling Canada had also probably made everyone even more worried. At least a little concerned that I might have run away. I had thought about it before, but I had never actually gotten the courage to do it, and I certainly wasn't going to do it now. So I knew my short time in these hallways was coming to an end. Slowly, I made my way back through the dark hallways towards an exit. I made sure not to head back the way I had come from, while also not going the same direction I had seen Canada heading a few moments earlier. I just really didn't want to get caught. After a while, I reached one of the entrances, and after looking around, I snuck out of the passageway. I really wanted to just instantly go back to hiding in my room, but I knew that wouldn't fly. So, slowly, I made my way around the nearby corridors, hoping to run into someone. And run into someone I did. Or, more accurately, they ran into me. Australia was chasing New Zealand down a corridor with a scorpion, and New Zealand, not paying attention, as he was being chased by a crazy man with a scorpion, ran straight into me. "Oops, sorry, mate," New Zealand apologized, before looking up and seeing it was me. His face instantly brightened. "Amay! Oi, Amay! Good to see you're alive. The way Dad was acting after you left, I thought you were a goner," Australia commented with a smile, coming up behind us. Honestly, so did I. I gave my little brothers a sheepish smile. But, oh no, I think I'm alright. Australia gave me a wicked smile. You might want to avoid Dad for the time being. He's still mighty pissed at you. I chuckled. I bet. Then I started to walk back towards my room. I think I'm just gonna go to sleep for a little. I'm pretty tired. If you see Mom, tell her I'm alright. And I didn't run away, alright? Okay. What about Dad? Australia asked with a line of hesitation in his voice. I just pretended I hadn't heard the question. Chapter 13. The Preparations. Time seemed to speed by. It's like when you really want some event to happen, it seems like it's taking forever. But whenever you don't want something to happen, everything else gets pushed out of the way to make the thing happen faster. And I did not want this ball to happen. The closer we got to the day of the ball, the more second thoughts I started to feel on the whole thing. Everyone else was super excited. Australia, New Zealand, even Mexico. This ball was the only thing they'd talk about, which was unfortunate because it was the only thing I didn't want to talk about. But nevertheless, the day arrived. And once again, I found myself getting prepared in Canada's room, because I have no sense of fashion myself. Britain said that this ball wasn't going to be a masquerade, meaning the chances were a lot higher of me being recognized. That wasn't great for me, because that just meant everyone would be coming up to try and talk. And I really didn't want that. So I let Canada pick out my outfit, just like last time, with hopes that if I dressed fancy enough, people might mistake me for someone else. I'd always been told I looked like an old friend of Phil's, Malaysia. I'd never met him, but almost everyone told me we looked a lot alike. Maybe tonight is the night I'll finally meet him, and I can convince him to take my place so I could leave. Almost like every story of the Prince and the Pauper, which my father forced me to read as a child. Actually, I never understood the story, or the message that the story was trying to convey. America, I need your opinion on this. Which looks better? Canada asked me suddenly, yanking me out of my daydream of being able to leave the ball early. I looked up to see Canada holding up 2 different ties. I sighed. Can, we've been through this. My fashion sense is a train wreck. I rolled my eyes at my brother. I know, but just like if you had to pick one, Canada asked, once again looking between the two with great interest. I don't know. I randomly pointed at one of the 2. That one? My brother inspected the time I was pointing at more intensely before nodding and putting it on. Why aren't you ready? I had the clothes all laid out for you. Canada questioned me with a touch of suspicion as he began to tie his tie. I stayed quiet, but hesitantly got up and started getting ready. We remained in silence for a few minutes while I struggled to get into my suit. Hey. Canada broke the silence. He was already finished and sitting on his bed casually, waiting for me. I huffed, still trying to put my suit on in a way that looked nice-ish. You're nervous. Canada continued, ignoring my frustratingly vague response. It wasn't a question. I sighed. Yes, Canada, I am. At this point, I had pretty much given up on looking nice and was purely trying to get it on. Why did suits have to be so complicated? Why? My brother asked. You told me what happened, and now you know not to make the same mistake. Oh, Canada, if only you knew, I muttered under my breath. It wasn't about the mistake, or even the misunderstanding. It never was. All I cared about was how Britain was going to react. He didn't really like any of us, but I could tell from the look in his eye that I was his least favorite. He never said it, it was never explicitly stated, but I could tell. Of course, Canada never had to deal with any of that. He was always the best. Britain loved him, Mother adored him, and all of the servants in the house knew he was the best behaved because he always said, thank you. Canada never had to worry about getting into an argument with our father. Canada never had to cower in his own room afterward, wondering if that had been the last straw. As much as I loved my little brother, he would never truly understand my situation. He would try to, and try to put himself in my shoes, but he wouldn't get it. And he shouldn't have to. I knew what the people thought about us. I knew everyone thinks Canada would be the better king. A knock came at the door, along with a muffled yet loud voice from outside. "Oi, you dingbats, you better hurry up or we're going to be in trouble." I couldn't help but laugh at Ozzy's choice of insult, and I yelled back, "We'll be out in a minute. Give us 2 seconds, you knucklehead." I heard some shuffling behind the door, and after a few seconds, we knew Australia had left. "Well, you heard the man. We should probably get going," Canada said. I nodded, but as I went for the door, I looked back. Lying on the bed, where I had fiddled with before, was the Masquerade mask Canada had given me. I really wanted to bring it. It had felt more freeing to be able to not be pressured by who I was, who everyone knew me as. As soon as I left the room, I knew that this was going to change. I could already hear all the Prince of Americas playing in my head. Canada seemed to notice me looking back. "It's going to be all right," my little brother gave me a smile. "Hey, and if you ever feel too stressed, come and find me. I'll always be there for you." I gave Canada a small smile. "Thanks, Can-Can." Then I took a deep breath and opened the door. Chapter 14, The Ball Redux, Part 1. Canada and I headed towards the main hall in silence. Canada seemed to be daydreaming about his almost girlfriend, Ukraine, but my thoughts were a lot less pleasant. With every step I took, I got more nervous about the ball. Hell, the masquerade was one thing. No one knew who I was unless they knew me personally, or I told them. But this time, everyone knew who I was. When we arrived at the main hall, Britain gave us a look. Clearly, we were late. Now that we're all in attendance, quickly I would like to say a few words. Britain began the briefing. Firstly, all the rules from the ball several weeks ago still apply. I saw Canada and Australia exchange a glance, but I paid no mind. Secondly, my father continued, you are to be on your best behavior. I do not want my reputation tarnished by one of your actions. I could feel Britain's gaze staring into me, but I ignored it, opting to tease my brothers instead. Yeah, guys, best behavior. Listen to your father, I said with a little bit of a snarky tone to my voice. My father, like usual, was not amused. America? Yeah, I know. I shoved my hands in my pockets and glared at the ground as if it were responsible for every bad thing that had ever happened to me. There was a pause before my father continued. Lastly, America, I better not see you without a lady by your side. I heard the snickers coming from Ozzy and Kiwi, but for the third time in 5 minutes, I opted to ignore them. I gave my father a subtle nod, hoping to not have to comment. Britain seemed rather pleased that I didn't argue with him, so finally he led us into the ballroom. And it was packed. Apparently everyone seemed to want to come to the first ball that we had in ages. I wasn't sure why. I guess not liking public places isn't a thing for most people. Somewhere from the room I heard our names being announced, and for a brief moment I panicked. The first chance I could, I ducked away from my brothers to go find Poland and Germany. I quickly found them on the side of the ballroom, talking, Germany holding a glass of champagne. There he is! We've been looking for you. Germany gave me a smile, pushing up his glasses. I eyed the glass he was holding nervously. He followed my gaze, then laughed. Don't worry, America. I was practically raised on beer. I'll be fine. There was an awkward pause before Poland cleared his throat. America, anything interesting happened to you lately? I gave my friend a smile that was more of a grimace. I had another argument with my father. Oh, I see. Germany took a sip of his champagne. He knew not to ask about what went on between me and my father. Speaking of my father, I remembered the last rule he had set and suddenly was aware of where I was. Sorry, guys, I just remembered. I gotta go. That's okay. We'll be here if you change your mind. I gave my friends a grin before walking to the middle of the crowd. It was only after I started to feel slightly claustrophobic that I realized I have no idea where I was planning on going. Hey, America, right? I heard someone say, and I turned to see someone I didn't recognize waving at me. I don't think I've ever properly introduced myself. I'm South Korea. It was then that I remembered meeting him at the Masquerade ball, by his brother and his sister. Oh yeah, I remember you. Sorry, the last time I saw you, everyone was wearing masks. Yeah, I know, South Korea said, laughing a little. So, there you are. A new guy who looked very similar to South Korea called, pushing his way through the crowd to get to us. We've been... He then saw me, and instantly his gaze narrowed. North, what is this? I am going to have to skip the conversation that is in Korean because I do not have the time for it this morning. But there's a conversation, and I'm just going to read the parts of this that I can understand that are in English. North hissed at his brother in a language I didn't understand. South rolled his eyes at his brother before turning back to me. I've got to get back to my sister. Sorry. Actually, if you don't mind, I'd like to come with you. You seem like a pretty cool guy, and I'd like to learn more about you, I said, hoping my ulterior motive of taking advantage of his sister's presence wasn't too obvious. South Korea gave me a big smile, clearly happy to spend more time with me, but North just glared at me, and with a huff said, if you must. The Korea twins led me over towards the center of the room. I could hear North muttering something under his breath, and judging by the tone, I assumed he was probably cursing. Japan, you wanted me? South asked, startling me out of my thoughts again. Oh, South, I was. Japan turned around, and I was suddenly aware of the amazing dress she was wearing. It was a white gown with little pieces of glitter that seemed to shimmer back and forth when she moved. It was strapless, but the sleeves didn't cover the shoulders, but instead came right across and made a little frill on the side of her arms. This was exactly the kind of lady Britain expected to be my wife. And suddenly I wanted to leave. And it wasn't because of the way North Korea was glaring at me. I muttered a little excuse before slipping away into the crowd, hoping I could leave before South noticed I was gone. It was only after I left that I realized I had nowhere to go. Chapter 15, The Ball Redux, Part 2. I found myself in the same exact situation as before. I had fled in a moment of panic, and there were several people who I did not want to be spotted by. One of whom was my father. After all, his third rule was, how did he put it? I better not see you without a lady by your side. Hold on, something was odd about that sentence. I felt the wheels in my brain whirring as they searched for a loophole. And then it hit me. He had said he shouldn't see me without a lady. He never said he had to see me. If I went somewhere where he couldn't see me, I was technically obeying his rule. So I went to the only place I could, the garden. As I got closer to my destination, I scoffed at myself for being so predictable. But nevertheless, I ended up in the same spot as before. For some reason, I wasn't surprised when I heard the rustling of bushes behind me. The noises didn't last very long and were followed by footsteps. I see you've improved your ability to climb over and through bushes. I said, breaking the silence. I see you're not at the party again, the person said, taking a few steps towards me. His voice was as smooth as I remembered it, with a faint hint of an accent I couldn't recognize. I sighed. Yep, here's my father, forcing me to go again. Whoopee. He walked up to me, and with a smile, he said, If it was up to me, I'd rather be forced to go than purposefully be left behind. As he got closer, I realized, rather oddly, that the man was still wearing his masquerade mask. You do know that you don't need to wear that, right? I asked. This time he laughed. It's for disguise, although I suppose that now that I'm here, I don't really need it. He took off his mask, and once again, I caught a glimpse of those sparkling amber eyes. We talked a little more. I learned that we both didn't like our fathers. The mystery man never knew his mother, but supposed she was probably nice enough, and as he never knew her, had no reason to miss her. I couldn't imagine life without my mother. She was nice to everyone, and was always willing to listen to you if you had a problem. Somehow we got to the topic of pets, and as I explained the long list of Australia's pets, he only laughed. My father never allowed us to have pets. The closest we had was when my little sister threw a smiley face on a potato and named him Rupert. I couldn't help but crack up. Why'd she choose Rupert? That's such a random name. I know, he added. We all told her to choose something different, like Nicholas or Veronica, but she was determined, and eventually we just let it happen. I could see the joy in his eyes as he remembered the story. He clearly cared about his siblings a lot. We stayed in silence for a bit, but it wasn't awkward. It was quite pleasant, actually. After a while, the man sighed. I'm sorry. I must be going. I want to catch my siblings before they leave. Oh, of course. I understand, I said, a little sad that our time had come to an end. As he shuffled towards the hallway, though, I remembered. Wait, I never caught your name. He chuckled softly. I'm sure you'll find out soon enough. I blinked. What does that mean? I asked, not in a rude way. I'm sorry, but... He pointed to the open door. Okay. I bit my lip. Well, if you must go... He smiled sadly before giving me a small wave and turning. I sighed and looked down, only to find the man's mask laying on the ground. He must have dropped it. I picked it up and ran into the hallway. Wait, you left your... But the hallway was empty. I sighed and begrudgingly headed back towards the garden. I still didn't want to get in trouble. I looked down at the mask in my hand. It had the same tricolor appearance as when I had first seen it, but it seemed to have less sparkle now that it was in my possession. I decided to stay out longer in the garden. Because, 1, I liked the silence, and 2, because I still didn't want to be seen by my father. Eventually, I heard some sounds that sounded like Britain getting dragged away by his brothers, and I knew it was okay to leave the sanctuary of the garden. I slunk away, slowly heading towards the ballroom. The party was still going on, just as strongly as when I had left, which was good. With all the chaos, I could get right back into the swing of things without anyone knowing anything had even happened. I didn't want to go back to Poland and Germany, or Canada and Ukraine, so I looked around for another option. Luckily for me, New Zealand was hanging out with 2 other people I'd never met, so I figured it was a good opportunity, as any, to hang out with my little brother. And so I told him, you'd better get that spider out of my room or... Oh, hey, America. Didn't see you there. New Zealand smiled at me, clearly telling his 2 friends about Australia. I mean, I didn't know any other person who owned a spider. Kiwi, how have you been doing? I smiled back at New Zealand. Sure, eh? New Zealand responded. I think that was good. I can never tell with all the random stuff Aussie and Kiwi say. Let me introduce you to my friends. Kiwi continued, gesturing to the two new people who both waved. This is Belarus and Kazakhstan. Hi, I'm sure you know me. I'm America. I put up my hand for a high five. Belarus instantly went for the high five, but Kazakhstan hesitated before putting his hand up too. Oh, and before you make any mistakes, I prefer the pronouns they, them, Belarus said, twirling a curl of hair. Oh. I stuttered, unsure how to respond to that remark. I spent the rest of the night hanging out with New Zealand, Kazakhstan, and Belarus. They were really nice people, although something was familiar about them. Chapter 16. The Question. Wait. Hold on. I held up my hands to stop the conversation. Did I miss something? Why is Ukraine still here? I thought she was leaving after the party. No offense, I'm just confused. The party had ended a couple hours ago, and most of the guests had slowly left the party until all that was left was us, Mexico, and apparently Ukraine. Ukraine laughed. None taken, America. She's going to be staying with us for the next few days, Canada explained. Then he leaned in and whispered, I think she ran away from home, but I'm not sure, and she won't tell me. Slowly, I nodded. Okay, then. This was going to take some getting used to. We'd never really had a lady stay in our house before, and I didn't have any sisters, for one thing. I loved Mexico like a sister, but she was never really the most ladylike. She would always play rough with her brothers, and any time there was a football match, you could bet Mexico would be playing. So me, Aussie, and Kiwi were all in the same boat. I knew Australia would stop bringing his pets around with him when he walked around. New Zealand would attempt to use more proper language, and I would just try to avoid conversations entirely. But since Ukraine seemed to usually hang out with Canada, that would be pretty hard. I spent most of my time in my room, or hanging out with Australia and his pets. By hanging out, I mean being forced to help Ozzy take care of his animals. Every now and then, my mind slipped back to the mask the guy left. Did he leave it here intentionally? If so, why? Back in my room, I couldn't help but look at the mask again. Picking it up, I looked again at its shimmer. I frowned. I wonder if Canada knew the mystery man. He definitely seemed to know everyone. Sticking the mask in my pocket, I opened the door to my room and started walking around looking for Canada. I found him rather quickly. It's not like he was hiding or anything. Hey, Ken, I said, walking over to my brother. Hey, what are you up to? Canada asked, giving me a big smile. I had a question, actually. I smiled back at my brother and handed him the mask. Do you know who this belongs to? Ukraine gasped before looking up at me. Where did you get this? I found it lying around, I said. I technically wasn't lying. I did find it lying around on the ground. Why do you ask? Ukraine took the mask gently. I think this is my brother's. You have a brother? I asked. To be honest, I really didn't know Ukraine well at all. I guess I was waiting until after she became Canada's fiancé and was practically family. But Ukraine didn't take it personally. She laughed. Yes, actually, I have 2 brothers, and a sibling who uses they-them pronouns. Then she looked at the mask again. This belongs to my older brother, Russia, I think. Did he come to the ball? I asked. Either one. I thought that I saw Ukraine flinch at the question before she said, He wasn't supposed to. Ukraine didn't bother elaborating, but it was fine. I had already all the information I needed. The mystery man was named Russia, and he was Ukraine's brother. You should invite your family over, Canada suggested. We could really get to know them. Ukraine thought it over. I'm sure I could, but I'm not sure how much Papa would want to come. But I'm sure I can talk him into coming. She handed me back the mask. That would be great if you can. Canada smiled at Ukraine, and she smiled back. God, if you're going to kiss, do it when I'm not around. I rolled my eyes. Both my brother and Ukraine stepped away from each other, each of them blushing furiously. That's not... We weren't... Canada stuttered, almost turning as red as his flag. I couldn't help but laugh. All right. I'll go now. I headed back to my room, satisfied with all the answers I had gotten. In my room, I sat on my bed, fantasizing about meeting Russia again. Perhaps he would bow, and I would take his hand. Maybe we would dance a perfect waltz the way I'd always been taught. At some point, I fell asleep, and my dreams were a weird mix of different people looking at me, different expressions on each of their faces, and me dancing with Russia. I got up early the next day, awoken by a sudden stop to my pleasant dreams. It was still dark out, but I dragged myself out of bed towards the dining hall. I really hadn't eaten anything last night, except for a little hors d'oeuvres that they had been passing out, and those weren't exactly filling. My plan was to go from the dining hall to the kitchen and grab some snacks like bread or cake or something, and then head back to my room and eat there. But to my surprise, Britton was actually sitting in his normal seat at the head of the table, sipping his tea. He looked up, turning to look at me with a smile. Ah, America, I wasn't expecting to see you here. Chapter 17. The Conversation. I blinked. Father? Yes, hurry up now. It's too early for this, Britton said, taking another sip of tea. Why are you up so early? I stuttered, still a little hesitant to do any interaction with my father. Even though it had been over a week since our argument, I still didn't want to risk doing something to upset him even more. Although, he really hadn't done anything. I could ask you the same thing, Father said, looking straight at me, a faint look of amusement on his face. I didn't say anything. I only looked at the ground quietly. I heard Britton chuckle to himself, then heard his voice again. America? Glancing up to my father again, I saw him gesture towards one of the empty seats next to him. America, come on, sit next to me. We can talk. Hesitantly, I stepped forward, half expecting him to push some insane punishment on me. Yet he didn't. When I took my seat, Britton turned to me. Do you want a snack? Maybe something to drink? Silently, I nodded. Alright, well, I'm assuming you don't want tea, so... He put a finger on his chin, thinking. Would you like some hot chocolate? I would, I muttered quietly. Surprisingly, my father didn't make me repeat myself, and he instead gave me a smile. Alright, America, one hot chocolate coming right up. The room went quiet for a moment before my father got out of his chair, walking towards the kitchen. Hold on, give me a moment. This wasn't as dramatic as I had hoped for, he said in a joking tone, and for a brief moment, as he left the room, I was reminded of the father I once had, the one who always tried to cheer me and Canada up back when New Zealand and Australia were still little. But then he came back into the room, and the fantasy was broken. At least he brought some hot chocolate. Britton sat back down into his seat, slowly siding the drink over to me. So, America, did you enjoy the ball? Britton began the conversation. Was it all to your liking? Well, there were some parts I liked better than others, I said quietly, looking down at my hot chocolate. Britton nodded. That's to be expected. Now, I assume you followed my rule? I hesitated a little, but nodded, trying to explain to myself that I had just found a loophole to the rule, but still feeling like I had lied. If my father had seen my hesitation, he didn't question it. Good. I take it you found a young girl that is decently pretty? I began to nod, thinking of Japan, but then I stopped myself. I know what you're doing. You're going to find something out about her, and then you're going to get me engaged to her, I exclaimed loudly. I told you last time, I don't like girls like that. Britton sipped his tea as if I hadn't just yelled at him. I understand that you don't want to get married. You're only 18. Your mother thinks you're still too young. But I think you can get married now. And then the love for your life will develop with time. That's not how it works, I grumbled, but my father cut me off. Did you know that I didn't know your mother at all before we got married? Britton said, taking a beat to sip more of his tea. And look at us now. I physically had to restrain myself from bringing up the occasional fights I would hear from my parents' room late at night when I couldn't sleep, because I knew it would only make Britton angry. I'm not going to marry someone I don't know. All right, then. We can arrange you to get to know her first, Britton said, for some reason surprised by my reaction. That won't help, I insisted. What will help, then? My father huffed, tired of me refusing him. Nothing, because I told you, I don't like girls. I clenched my fists together. And I told you that love is not a requirement for marriage. Britton rolled his eyes. It seems like you're the one who's not listening. My vision turned red with rage, and the next thing I knew, I was yelling. I don't know why you think that I'm just like you, because I'm not. I don't care about getting married, I don't care about girls, and I certainly don't care about ruling the kingdom. Britton's eyes widened in shock, and he opened his mouth to speak. America? No, I'm not finished. I know that I'm the oldest child, and that I'm expected to take over the kingdom, but I don't want to, and I know I wouldn't be good at it. Hell, we both know Canada would be a better ruler than me, and he's already head over heels for Ukraine. They both would love to get married, so why don't you just let me leave and let him take over? I snapped before walking away. I could hear my father calling my name, but I ignored him. It was only after I was back in my room that I realized that I hadn't even had any of the hot chocolate. Chapter 18, The Introductions. I woke up late in the next day. I really didn't want to get out of bed, mostly because I always cowered in my room after every argument I had with my father. But this time was different. I heard people talking from down the hall. Not just my family either. A couple of voices I didn't recognize in the early morning. So I did what any sane person would do in that situation. I stumbled out of bed, shoved some decent-looking clothes on, and opened the door quickly and closed it behind me. Down the hall was Canada, Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. And for some reason, an adult man who I'd never seen before in my life. Canada spotted me and waved me over. Hesitantly, I walked down to where everyone was. And this is my older brother, America. Canada introduced me as I walked over. Belarus nodded. I think we met him at the ball, right, Kaz? I think so, Kazakhstan said, looking me over. His hair looks a lot more messy than before, but I think it's him. I felt a slight tinge of embarrassment at this, and I said, well, I just woke up, and... Belarus laughed. Don't worry, America. It's a good look for you. Somehow, hearing that compliment made me even more embarrassed. Anyways, Canada cut in, trying to keep everything on track. May, this is, well, you've met Ukraine, her siblings, who you've apparently met already, and, her father. I turned to look at the adult man standing in the room. He was wearing a funny-looking hat and had an eye patch over his left eye. "Hello," I said, pretty unsure of how to act. "Привет, I am Soviet. You are America?" he asked, switching between a foreign language I didn't know and English. "Yes, I am." I looked at him straight in the eye. Something was off about him. Something was missing, something Ukraine had said, that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was only after Canada had started to lead everyone away that I remembered what it was. "Ukraine, didn't you say you had an older brother?" I asked, and time just seemed to stop. First, Ukraine looked at me, an almost worried expression on her face, and then her father got to me. "I don't know why Ukraine would have told you that," he said, glaring at me. "She knows that she's the oldest of my children since that little suka went against everything I stood for." "So, what happened to him?" I asked hesitantly, knowing with every word I said Soviet got a step closer to straight up murdering me in my own house. "He has been, how would you say?" A puzzled look came over his face, and he turned to look at Belarus. "Как твои говоришь, отказва английский язык?" Roughly translates to, how do you say refuse or disown in English? "Disowned?" Belarus answered, a bit confused as to why Soviet was asking them. Yes. He has been disowned from this family." Soviet turned back to me, the glare appearing back on his face. Man, I wish I could be that lucky. I looked back at Soviet, not scared by his glaring. If only my father would do that. I could leave. Then I straightened. "Anyway, you said it was Soviet. I'm sure I'll be seeing you again. After all, it's not going to be long until Canada over there decides to put a ring on it." Before Soviet could reply, I spun on my heel and walked away. I confidently walked until I had passed the corner and I knew I was out of view of the guests. Then I stopped, trying to figure out where I could go. I didn't want to go anywhere where I could possibly see my father, because I still hadn't forgot about our little argument last night. And I definitely didn't want to see Canada and his tour group, especially since I had just made an amazing dramatic exit. So that boiled down to two places: my room and the garden. And clearly I wasn't in the mood for cowering, since I had just basically shown up a grown man with one hell of a glare. So once again I headed to the garden. When I arrived, I listened quietly to make sure no one was heading this way, and when no one was, I let myself be a little more relaxed, and I leaned on these small plant holders. A slight breeze started blowing, and my mind started wandering, picturing Russia the way I'd first seen him, at the Masquerade, when his eyes sparkled in the darkness, and, God, he just looked so hot. Wait, where'd that come from? I'd never thought about anyone like that before. But the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. I was in love with Russia. I had been since I met him, and it had always been in the back of my mind. He was the reason that I was gay in the first place. I groaned loudly at this. Britain wouldn't like this. What seems to be the matter? A voice I had subconsciously memorized said from behind me, and I turned around to see Russia just standing there. "Just thinking about things," I said, trying to appear nonchalant, even though I was absolutely freaking out. Russia raised an eyebrow, but didn't question it. "Hey, wait, how'd you get in so easily?" I asked, narrowing my eyes at the tall figure in front of me. Russia shrugged. "Practice." He didn't elaborate further. "And why are you here in the first place?" I put my hands on my hips. "For my siblings," he said, avoiding eye contact. I didn't move, and eventually he sighed. "It's a long story." Chapter 19. The Decision. leaned back on the wall again. Well, it's not like I have anywhere to be. But I still don't want to waste your time, Russia said, still avoiding looking me in the eyes. Then make a long story short, I exclaimed. Finally, he gave in. All right, America, I'll tell you. Hold on, how do you know my name? I asked, cutting him off once again. He laughed. America, think about it. My sister is dating your brother. I'm bound to learn your name eventually, as I'm sure you know mine. Wait, how? I went to ask, but Russia cut me off again. Do you want to hear the story or not? He said, and I shut up. Well, it's pretty complicated, but to put it simply, my father always taught me and my siblings to think one way, and that his system was the right one. But when I saw how it was affecting people, I didn't want to be a part of it anymore, Russia said, in a tone of voice that made him sound slightly embarrassed. And when I confronted my father about it, he kicked me out, said something about not spreading my ideas to the rest of the family. So here I am. In that case, you probably shouldn't come inside, I commented. Your father's here now, actually. I just met him. Russia grimaces. I hope he didn't say anything too harsh to you. I smiled. Don't worry, if anything, I was too harsh with him. Well, that's a first, Russia said, raising his eyebrows in suspicion. There was a small period of comfortable silence, before another question came into my head. Hey, Russia, why do you always seem to know when your siblings are over here? I watch them, Russia responded automatically. Okay, wow, stalker much? I joked. Perhaps watch wasn't the right word, Russia mused. More like I check in on them, just to make sure my father's not doing anything bad to them. I see, I commented. Again, we fell into silence, but this time it was a lot more awkward. Russia, I said aloud, looking out into the distance again. What do you think about running away? The question seemed to startle Russia. I don't know. What do you mean, running away from home? I didn't respond, but the silence spoke for me. America, why would you want to do that? Russia asked. Your family needs you. No, I shook my head. They don't. I didn't bother elaborating, but I knew it was true. Aussie and Kiwi had each other, Canada now had Ukraine, and I'm sure that Britain wouldn't mind having a break from arguing with me. Russia huffed and started to walk away, but for some reason, I didn't want him to go. I wanted to run away. I wanted to leave my old life behind and start something new. But I didn't want to leave Russia behind. Stay a little longer? I whispered. For a moment, Russia didn't respond, and I worried that he might leave and I would never see him again. But then he stepped closer to me. As he did, I heard him mutter under his breath, "Only because you're so adorable." I blushed, but tried to hide it and pretended I didn't hear him. We stayed like that for a few moments, before I turned to Russia again. I have something I need to tell you. Okay, what is it? Russia looked slightly concerned. I took a deep breath and began talking. Look, we haven't known each other very long, and I don't really know hardly anything about you. Hell, I didn't even know your name until, like, yesterday. I chuckled to myself. But I think I love you, and I want to spend some more time with you. Will you run away with me? Russia seemed to be frozen with shock. Clearly, he wasn't expecting it. He looked longfully at the door, and I knew what he was thinking. You don't need to worry about them. They're strong enough to take care of themselves. Plus, any minute, Canada's going to propose, and he can help take care of them too. I reasoned. You don't have to come if you don't want to. Are you sure this is what you want to do? Russia asked, and I nodded. Yes, I've been thinking about this a lot, actually. I bit my lip, almost too afraid to admit it. We looked at each other for a length of time that seemed to go on indefinitely, my eyes meeting his sparkling amber ones. But eventually he smiled and grabbed my hand. I think I'll come with you. Clearly, you're going to need someone as experienced as me. I laughed and put my head on Russia's shoulder. Give me some time to prepare and we'll be off. The epilogue. Canada started his day off like normal. He woke up, got dressed, and walked out into the hallway to head to America's room to make sure his brother got up in time. He knocked on the door, gently enough to not cause a ruckus, but loud enough that someone could hear it inside. There was no answer. Canada knocked a little harder, knowing that if his brother was still asleep, he wouldn't have heard the knock. Still, no reply. Usually after this, Canada would leave, assuming that America was either already up and around the house, or he was just still asleep. But today was different. Something felt wrong. So gently, Canada opened the door to his brother's room. Instead of seeing his brother, Canada saw on the bed there was a small string-tied package and a piece of paper. First, he went up to the piece of paper and saw it was a note written in America's handwriting. To, I assume, Canada. I've decided to run away. Please don't be worried. I'll be fine. Also, don't act like this hasn't been a long time coming. We all knew I was thinking about it for quite a while now. Please don't send a search party out for me. I don't want to be found. I think if you do send a search party out and you do find me, I'll probably just run away again. But without the super amazing dramatic exit that I'm making now. After all, what's the point of doing something I've already done? Especially if it's dramatic like this. Besides that, there's a few notes here. If Britton asks where I am, tell him I've eloped with someone I fell in love with. It's technically true. When it comes to Mother, Aussie, and Kiwi, tell them the truth. They deserve to know. I know that someday you'll man up and put a ring on it. You know who I'm talking about. When you do, remember to invite me. I'm not going to forget that not really threat, not really insult I made to Soviet. Just leave the invitation in the garden. I'll be sure to pick it up. When you do decide to pop the question, remember to take care of her family. Ukraine's brother is sitting on my bed, watching me write this, long story, and he's concerned about leaving his family behind. Just take care of them for him. Your brother, America. P.S. I have a bit of a present for you. Make sure you keep it safe. It's one of a kind, and when I inevitably come back home, I will probably want it back. But since I'm leaving, I don't really need it, and after all, you are the one who gave it to me, so I think it belongs in your hands. Canada read the letter, mentally promising to do everything America had asked. When he got to the last part, he glanced at the package, wondering what could be inside. He put the letter down on the bed and picked up the package. It was pretty light, and the package itself was pretty small. Gently, Canada pulled on the string to untie it, and pushed away some of the paper. When he saw what it was, he gasped. It was a very intricate masquerade mask, white with golden designs like vines all around it. Or, more specifically, it was America's masquerade mask. Canada smiled as he hugged the mask close to his chest. Don't worry, May. I won't let you down. And that's the end of this fic. I hope you enjoyed it. I finished the whole thing. I'm happy. And since you managed to handle me, I guess, rambling or yapping at you for however long this ends up being, you deserve to know a little bit about what's happening next. Up next, it is going to be what I managed to finish of Sinclaire Academy, which I ended up dropping because the secondhand embarrassment in Chapter 8 was way too bad for me. I just could not finish it. Also, it broke one of my terminal rules, which is must be complete. I found out it's not complete. It has a second book that isn't complete. And I'm just gonna end it off giving y'all a fucking dance scene. So enjoy that, I guess. But yeah. I don't know how y'all handle me for godforsaken amounts of time. However you do it, kudos to you. I don't understand. You know, I sometimes do play videos similar to mine when I'm going to sleep. Maybe that's how you handle me. My voice is a bit jarring, though. And again, since you listen to me this long, I'm going to guess you're probably in the server and maybe on the subreddit. But I'm going to extend that invitation again. Feel free to join the server. It's linked down in the description. And the Reddit, which is also linked down in the description. Anyway, you have a great rest of your day, night, or whatever it is for you. Tomorrow I will be seeing you with Sinclaire Academy.